Imagine for a second that you are a devoted, incredibly disciplined student of, well, one of history's greatest teachers.
Right.
You've dedicated your entire life to this profound spiritual path. But then, on a routine walk into town just to get some food, you get trapped.
Completely ambushed.
Yeah, you are ensnared in this illicit illusion, dragged into a highly compromising situation by a literal powerful magic spell. You're totally helpless.
Which is terrifying, if you think about it.
Oh, absolutely. And the only way out is for your teacher to beam a magical rescue mantra across the city to break the spell and pull you back from the absolute brink.
It really sounds like the climax of a high fantasy novel.
It totally does. But that dramatic, cinematic rescue is actually the inciting incident of the text we're unpacking in today's deep dive. Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm your host.
And I am your resident expert. Thrilled to be here to break this one down.
So tell us about this unforgettable opening scene. Where does this actually come from?
Right, so this comes from Volume 1 of the Shurangama Sutra. For some context, this is a massive foundational text in Mahayana Buddhism.
And Mahayana Buddhism is basically the broad philosophical tradition focused on achieving enlightenment, not just for yourself, but for the benefit of all beings.
Right, exactly. You're trying to help everybody else wake up, too. So this text was translated into Chinese during the Tang Dynasty, around the year 705 CE. And while it starts with this spectacular magical rescue we just talked about, that event is really just the bait.
Just the hook to get us paying attention.
Yeah, exactly. It gets you invested.
And that bait sets up our mission for today, because what we are actually going on in this deep dive is a profound philosophical detective hunt.
We really are.
We're going to try and answer a surprisingly difficult question, which is, where exactly is your mind?
Which feels almost too simple to ask, until you are actually forced to answer it and realize you entirely can't.
Right. And by following this ancient, incredibly rigorous debate, we are going to explore why confusing our actual mind with our passing thoughts is basically the mechanical root of all our daily stress and suffering.
It's a huge claim, but the text backs it up so well.
I mean, you and I use our minds every single day. We use them to solve problems at work, to stress about the future, to learn new things.
Constantly.
But living like that is kind of like constantly wearing a pair of glasses to look at the world without ever stopping to actually take the glasses off and examine the lenses themselves.
That is such a good way to put it.
We just assume the mind is, well, there. We assume it's doing the looking.
And that unchecked assumption is the main target of this text. It's going to relentlessly dismantle that idea.
Yeah.
But to understand the philosophical teardown, we really have to establish the stakes of that dramatic opening you mentioned.
Okay, let's unpack this. The story kicks off with a grand vegetarian feast. King Krishnajit is hosting the Buddha, along with this massive entourage of 12,250 fully enlightened arhats and bodhisattvas.
Which, for anyone unfamiliar with those terms, just think of them as the absolute elite, top-tier spiritual scholars and saints of this tradition.
So it's basically the spiritual event of the season.
Oh, 100%. But there is one notable absence.
Ananda.
Right, Ananda. He is one of the Buddha's core, most famous disciples. They're actually cousins, too.
Oh, I didn't realize they were cousins.
Yeah. So because Ananda had accepted a separate invitation earlier, he misses the big royal feast. He ends up having to go begging for food in the city entirely by himself, separated from the safety of the group.
And that is where things go completely off the rails for him. As he's walking through the city, he encounters the Matangi woman.
Right.
And she uses this incredibly powerful illusion spell. Specifically, the text calls it a Brahma mantra.
And we should clarify, this isn't just some cheap parlor trick. It's a profound psychological hijack.
It completely overpowers his agency.
Totally.
She draws him onto an illicit bed, and he is right on the verge of breaking his strict monastic vows. He is just trapped in his own compromised mind.
But the Buddha, who is back at the feast, perceives exactly what is happening. The text describes the Buddha shooting this brilliant 1,000-petaled lotus light from the crown of his head.
Wait, a lotus light? That is such a striking image.
It really is. And within that light, a manifestation of the Buddha appears and speaks a counter mantra.
Wow.
Yeah, and then he sends the Bodhisattva Manjusri to carry this spoken mantra across the city, shatter the illusion, and bring Ananda back.
So Manjusri swoops in, breaks the spell, and escorts Ananda and the woman back to the monastery.
Safe and sound.
Physically, maybe, but this is where the real philosophical journey begins, because Ananda is an absolute wreck.
Oh, he's a mess.
He is weeping, bowing at the Buddha's feet, completely ashamed of how weak his willpower turned out to be. He's devastated that all his years of intensive study apparently meant nothing when faced with real-world temptation.
It's a crisis of faith in himself.
Exactly. And the Buddha looks at him in this state and asks him an incredibly piercing question. He asks, "Why did you leave your worldly life to follow me in the first place?"
Which is just a moment of terrifying vulnerability.
Certainly.
The Buddha is asking for the unvarnished truth about Ananda's initial motivation. He's asking what was driving Ananda's mind before all the monastic training even started.
And Ananda gives a shockingly honest answer, like unbelievably honest.
He really does.
He basically admits that he joined up because he saw the Buddha's 32 physical marks of perfection. He says he thought the Buddha's body was just physically stunning, glowing like crystal and purple gold, and completely free from the grossness of normal human biology.
Yeah, it's very flesh level.
He essentially confesses, "I followed you because you were beautiful." I mean, joining a profound, ancient monastic order just because the guru had really great hair.
Right.
How does the Buddha even respond to something that shallow without just kicking him out of the monastery?
Well, what's fascinating here is the Buddha's total lack of judgment. He doesn't scold Ananda for being superficial or shallow at all.
Really? No reprimand?
None. And this is the pedagogical genius of the text. The Buddha takes this embarrassing flesh-level admission and uses it as a trapdoor into the deepest philosophy imaginable.
So he uses the superficiality as the actual starting point for the investigation.
Exactly that. The Buddha says, in effect, "Okay, Ananda, you say your eyes saw my physical traits, and your mind loved them. If you love these traits, tell me what exactly is doing the looking and what exactly is feeling the love. Point to this mind of yours."
Which launches us into what has to be the ultimate game of philosophical hide-and-seek.
Oh, it really is a teardown.
Ananda claimed it was his eyes and mind that were attracted to the Buddha, so the Buddha demands he locate them. And what follows is a systematic, just brutal teardown of every single assumption you or I have about our own consciousness.
Because Ananda makes 7 distinct, desperate attempts to locate his mind. And the Buddha shoots down every single one of them using strict, inescapable logic.
So let's go through some of these. The first guess is the most intuitive one, right?
Yeah, Ananda says, well, the mind is obviously inside the physical body.
Which is the modern default, obviously. We all just assume the mind is in the brain, safely tucked inside the skull.
Sure, it feels like common sense. But the Buddha counters this with spatial logic. He says, if the mind is a perceiver sitting inside the physical body, it should be able to see the inside of the body first, before it looks out through the eyes.
Oh, that's clever.
Right. You should be able to see your own stomach lining, your heart, your liver. Since you can't see your own internal organs, the mind can't literally be a thing sitting inside them looking out.
It's funny, I was thinking about it like a modern security camera.
Okay, how so?
It's like putting a camera inside a dark bank vault to watch the street outside. That camera would have to record the inside of the dark vault before its view passed through the window to see the street.
Yes, that's a perfect analogy.
But we don't experience the darkness of our own skulls when we look at a tree. We just see the tree. So the Buddha completely corners his logic there.
And Ananda is reeling from this. I mean, if his mind isn't inside him, his entire sense of self is threatened. So he scrambles, and his panic leads him to throw out the exact opposite idea.
Naturally.
He guesses that if it's not inside, the mind must be hovering outside the body, observing it from afar.
But the Buddha immediately destroys that too. He argues that if the mind and the physical body are entirely separate entities occupying completely different spaces, they wouldn't be able to share sensations.
Exactly.
If the mind knows something, the body wouldn't physically feel it. To prove this connection, the Buddha holds up his hand, the text calls it his cotton soft hand, and shows it to Ananda.
And he asks him a very direct question.
Right, he asks, when your eyes see my hand, does your mind register it? And Ananda admits the visual input and the mental recognition happen simultaneously.
So they are inextricably connected. The mind cannot be hovering outside.
So now Ananda is really getting desperate. He tries to find a loophole, basically a synthesis of inside and outside.
Yeah, guess number 3. He suggests the mind is hidden behind the eyes, lurking in the sense organs themselves.
Like someone looking through a window.
Exactly. He compares it to someone looking through glass crystal. The mind is behind the eye, looking through the biological lens.
I love how the Buddha handles this one. It's so logical. He says, if you put a glass bowl over your eyes to look through it, you still see the glass.
Right.
The glass has a visible presence to the perceiver. If your mind is literally sitting directly behind the eyes, looking through them like glass, why doesn't your mind see the eyeball itself?
It's brilliant.
You don't see your own retina blocking your view. It's an airtight counter-argument.
It really is. And the text doesn't let up. Ananda makes 4 more guesses, and each one gets more and more abstract as his conventional logic fails him.
Like he tries guessing that the mind exists in the darkness when he closes his eyes.
And the Buddha points out that darkness is just an environmental condition you're observing. It's not the observer itself.
Then Ananda tries to say the mind is somewhere in the middle between the body and the outside world.
To which the Buddha points out that the middle is completely relative. The middle of what, exactly?
Yeah, if there's no fixed boundary, the middle has no location.
He even tries to claim the mind is just the abstract concept of non-attachment, which the Buddha points out as a paradox. You can't have an action of non-attachment without a fundamental awareness there to perform it.
So the Buddha is doing something profound here. He is forcing Ananda, and by extension, anyone reading or listening to this, so you and me, to realize that our everyday default assumption about our identity is structurally flawed.
We all walk around feeling like a tiny pilot.
Yes. A tiny pilot sitting inside our heads, looking out the windows of our eyes, steering a biological meat suit around.
And the Buddha's proving that this tiny pilot model falls apart completely under rigorous investigation.
And when that model falls apart for Ananda, he experiences a total breakdown. He does not take this intellectual defeat well at all.
Not at all.
With all his assumptions demolished, he is left terrified. He cries out to the Buddha that if his mind isn't inside, outside, in the middle, or anywhere he can locate, then he is fundamentally no different from a clump of dirt or a piece of dead wood.
He feels like he literally does not exist.
Yeah, the text notes that the whole assembly of monks starts getting anxious and confused watching this happen.
It is the ultimate existential crisis. Ananda has lost his anchor. But this crisis is entirely necessary. The Buddha had to tear down the false foundation so he could rebuild Ananda's understanding of how perception actually works.
So the Buddha steps in to reassure everyone, and he introduces a framework he calls the 2 roots of our reality. He explains that we suffer precisely because we confuse these 2 roots.
Which is the core of the whole teaching.
The first is the root of beginningless death and rebirth. This is our habit of mistaking our constant grasping noisy thoughts for our true self.
Right.
And the second is the root of original bodhi, or nirvana. This is the pure, bright, still essence of consciousness that we fundamentally are, but that we constantly ignore.
We really need to pause on how these roots explain Ananda's panic, though.
Yeah, let's get into that.
Ananda is freaking out because he's operating entirely from that first root. He has spent his whole life identifying with his grasping, locating thoughts.
So when the Buddha proves those thoughts can't be physically located, Ananda feels like he's dying.
Exactly. He thinks, if I can't find my thoughts, I don't exist. He is completely blind to the second root. He doesn't realize that the quiet awareness watching this panic happen is his true nature.
That makes perfect sense. He's confusing the noise coming out of the radio with the radio itself.
That's a great way to look at it.
So to pull Ananda out of this panic, the Buddha uses an incredible analogy to explain this pure essence, the second root. He asks Ananda about a blind man. He asks, does a blind man see?
And using conventional everyday logic, Ananda says no. A blind man doesn't see anything. His eyes are broken. He only sees darkness.
But the Buddha immediately corrects him. He asks Ananda to imagine taking a person with perfect 20/20 vision and locking them in a pitch-black, windowless room. What does the sighted person see?
They see the exact same darkness that the blind man sees.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's a complete paradigm shift. We usually think seeing is an action that absolutely requires light and a physical object to look at.
Right. If the lights go out, we say, I can't see.
But the Buddha is arguing that perceiving nothing but darkness is still a fully active, functioning act of perception.
Yes. You are highly aware of the dark.
The foundational awareness itself never turned off. It didn't break. It's just registering a different input.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Buddha drives this home by saying, imagine a lamp is suddenly lit in that pitch-black room.
Okay.
Conventionally, we say the lamp reveals the objects, but the lamp itself isn't doing the seeing.
Right, the lamp is just providing the light.
Exactly. The physical eyeball is just like the lamp. It's a biological tool that requires conditions like light to function. But the nature of seeing, the underlying awareness that registers both the darkness and the light equally, that is something else entirely. That is the true mind.
So the eye is just the lens, but the awareness is the one looking through it, even when the lens is covered.
And this is the exact reason we experience so much daily stress. We constantly confuse the physical tools of perception and the sensory data they process with the foundational awareness behind them.
We think that if the objects we are looking at disappear, or if our frantic thoughts stop, our mind will just vanish.
We fear the darkness, and because we fear losing our identity, we cling desperately to our passing thoughts, even the painful, anxious ones, just so we feel like we exist.
We cling to the stressful noise just to avoid the scary silence. That is such a profound diagnosis of the human condition.
It really is.
But it's still a really abstract concept to grasp, and Ananda is clearly still struggling to lock it in. So to cement this, the discussion shifts to a physical demonstration of what is changing versus what is permanent.
Right. Another senior disciple in the assembly named Kondinya steps up to help. He shares that he achieved his own enlightenment by deeply understanding the relationship between just two words, guest and dust.
Okay, let's look at the guest analogy first. Kondinya says, imagine a traveler stopping at a roadside inn. They arrive, they eat a meal, they sleep for the night, and the next morning they pack up their bags and hit the road again.
They are the guest. Their defining characteristic is that they are transient.
But the innkeeper never leaves. He stays put behind the desk, calmly watching the guests arrive and depart.
It's a brilliant metaphor for consciousness. The thoughts, the bodily sensations, the strong emotions, those are all guests. They arrive, stay for a bit, and eventually vanish.
But the foundational awareness that watches the anger arrive and watches the anger leave, that is the innkeeper. The innkeeper doesn't pack up his bags and leave the building just because a guest checked out.
The dust analogy is just as beautiful, honestly.
Yeah, walk us through that one.
So Kondinya says, imagine a beam of bright sunlight streaming through a crack in a door into a dark room. Suspended in that beam of light, you can see thousands of tiny dust motes dancing, swirling, and colliding.
Like when you haven't dusted your living room in a while.
Exactly. The dust is constantly agitated, but the empty space holding the dust, the space is completely still. It doesn't swirl just because the dust is swirling.
So to make sure Ananda truly understands this, the Buddha takes these poetic metaphors and actually makes them physical.
Yes, he holds up his hand, which is glowing with light, and he opens his fist, closes it, opens it, and closes it. He looks at Ananda and asks, what is moving?
And Ananda, who is finally starting to catch on to the logic, says, your hand is opening and closing. The physical object is moving, but my ability to see it isn't opening or closing.
He's getting it. So the Buddha pushes it one step further. He shoots a beam of light to Ananda's right, and Ananda physically turns his head to look at it.
Cool.
Then the Buddha shoots a beam of light to Ananda's left, and Ananda turns his head the other way. The Buddha asks again, what is moving? And Ananda says, my head is moving, but my nature of seeing doesn't wobble or move.
Wait, I have to push back on this.
Oh, sure.
If I physically turn my head right now, my field of vision sweeps across the room. I see my desk, then the wall, then the door. Doesn't that prove that my seeing is physically moving through space? How can the text claim the seeing doesn't move?
It's a great question, and it's exactly the kind of confusion that text expects from a rigorous debate. Think back to the innkeeper.
Okay.
The objects in your field of vision are sweeping past your eyes, yes, and your physical eyeballs are rotating in your biological skull.
Right.
But the intrinsic silent capacity to be aware doesn't physically travel from point A to point B.
Yeah.
It doesn't possess a coordinate location that changes. It just calmly registers the movement of the visual data.
I see.
It's exactly like the innkeeper calmly standing behind the desk, watching a group of guests frantically sprint across the lobby. The awareness itself is the still, empty space holding the dancing dust.
Wow. So what does this all mean for us? The text concludes this massive philosophical teardown with a really powerful phrase. It says, we suffer because we recognize a thief as our son.
That's such a striking line.
We invite the thief into our house, give him the keys to the safe, and let him rob us blind, entirely because we mistake him for our own flesh and blood.
We identify completely with the moving dust, our fleeting thoughts, our anxieties, our physical impulses, instead of identifying with the unmoving, empty space of our true nature.
When you mistake the transient guest for the permanent innkeeper, your entire life becomes a frantic, exhausting process of constantly packing and unpacking emotional bags that don't even belong to you.
You're just worn out by the endless comings and goings of your own mind.
This has been an incredible journey. I mean, we started with Ananda trapped by a magic spell, rescued by a mantra, and forced to examine his shallow crush on his teacher's physical appearance.
We really covered a lot of ground.
We watched the Buddha systematically dismantle every logical location we could possibly invent for the mind, proving it's not inside the organs, not hovering outside, and not hiding behind the retinas.
And we ended up discovering that we are not the swirling dust of our anxious thoughts. We are the still space that contains them. This raises an important question, though. I'll hand this back to you. But the text gives us this brilliant theoretical framework, right? But how does shifting our perspective from the dust to the space actually change our day-to-day lived experience?
I think it leaves you with something highly practical to mull over. The next time you feel completely overwhelmed by a chaotic thought, a stressful email from your boss, or a really strong, difficult emotion, well, just pause. Ask yourself, in this exact moment, are you the frantic guest just passing through the inn, or are you the quiet innkeeper watching them arrive? And what happens to that overwhelming stress? What happens to that spell you're under if you simply refuse to pack its bags for it?